We arrived in the region just before winter tightened its grip on the mountains, a place so remote that even our satellite maps looked unfinished, as if someone had decided it wasn't worth filling in the details. Officially, our deployment orders listed the mission as Area Security and Reconnaissance Support for a classified intelligence operation. Unofficially, we all knew we were there because people kept disappearing. Not just locals, but hunters, aid workers, and even a small foreign patrol months before us. As a U.S. Army infantry squad, we were trained to expect enemy fighters, IEDs, ambushes, and deception, not ghost stories. Yet from the moment we landed, the locals' fear was impossible to ignore. They didn't shout or protest our presence. They avoided eye contact, spoke only when spoken to, and always glanced toward the tree line when the sun began to drop. Through our interpreter, one name kept surfacing again and again, whispered more than spoken, Shadow Walker. According to them, it wasn't a man, but it walked like one. It wasn't an animal, but it hunted with intent. It appeared at night, moved without sound, and watched from the darkness until someone made the mistake of being alone. We logged it as cultural folklore, the kind of fear that grows in isolated regions with a history of violence. Still, none of us laughed. Not because we believed the story, but because every person described the same thing, using almost identical words, even though many of them had never spoken to each other. Our squad consisted of 8 men, all combat veterans to varying degrees. Staff Sergeant Miller was our squad leader, calm, methodical, and not the type to be rattled by rumors. He ordered standard procedures, increased perimeter security, overlapping sectors of fire, night vision checks, and thermal scans every hour. We set up a temporary outpost near an abandoned supply route, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and a steep rock face on the 4th. From a tactical standpoint, it was a bad place to get surprised, which made it perfect for an enemy ambush, but intelligence insisted there was no hostile force operating in the area. That was the first contradiction. The second came after sunset on our first night. The forest went dead quiet. No wind in the leaves. No insects. No distant animal movement. Anyone who has spent time in the field knows silence like that isn't normal. It feels heavy, like the environment itself is holding its breath. Around 0100 hours, one of our guys, Torres, reported movement at the edge of his sector. Thermal showed nothing. Night vision showed shadows that didn't line up with the terrain. Miller dismissed it as fatigue and ordered us to stay sharp. By morning, nothing had happened, but something had changed. About 20 meters outside our perimeter, we found impressions in the soil. They looked like footprints, but they were wrong. Too long. Too narrow. The stride length suggested something tall, moving deliberately, not running. There were no claw marks, no heel impressions, and no sign of weight distribution you'd expect from a bear or large animal. Miller photographed them and logged them as unidentified tracks. None of us said the obvious thing out loud. On the second day, the locals packed up before sunset and moved down into the valley, abandoning livestock, tools, and even food. One old man stopped in front of me as they were leaving and, through the interpreter, said, "It watches soldiers now." That night, our orders changed. Intelligence requested a night patrol along the old route where most of the disappearances had occurred. We stepped off at 2,230 hours, moving in a staggered column, spacing tight, weapons up. The forest swallowed our IR light. Radio comms crackled in and out, distorted by terrain. About 40 minutes in, we heard it, a sound I still struggle to describe. It wasn't a growl or a scream. It was more like breathing, deep and controlled, coming from multiple directions at once. We halted. Miller raised his fist. Thermal again showed nothing, but I felt it then, a pressure like being watched by something that understood what we were. Then, without warning, Private Lewis screamed. He went down hard, dragged backward into the darkness, so fast it didn't look possible. We opened fire immediately, disciplined bursts into the tree line, illumination flares lighting up the forest in harsh white light. For a split second I saw it. Tall, lean, standing upright, its limbs bent at angles that made my stomach turn. No reflective eyes, no visible weapon, just a shape that didn't belong. Then the light died, and it was gone. Lewis was gone too. No blood trail, no struggle marks, nothing, just silence again. When we extracted at dawn, Command told us to classify the incident as enemy unknown. But we all knew the truth. Whatever the locals called the Shadow Walker wasn't a story, and it had just declared us targets. The extraction after Lewis disappeared was quiet in the worst possible way. No one spoke during the movement back to the outpost, not even over the radio, except for short, clipped confirmations that everyone else was still present. 8 men had stepped out on that patrol. 7 came back. In the army, you're trained to accept losses, to compartmentalize and move forward, but what happened to Lewis didn't fit into any category we recognized. There was no blood, no spent casings near where he went down, no signs of a struggle. He hadn't been shot, stabbed, or hit by an explosive. He had simply been taken. When we reached the outpost at first light, Miller immediately reported the incident up the chain, describing the contact as hostile unknown entity. That phrase alone caused problems. Within an hour, intelligence officers arrived by helicopter, not the usual analysts but field-grade personnel with questions that sounded more like denials. They asked us repeatedly if we were sure it wasn't an ambush, an animal, or friendly fire confusion. Miller stood his ground. He was precise, unemotional, and detailed. He described the shape I had seen under the flare light, the speed at which Lewis had been pulled, and the lack of thermal signature. The officers exchanged looks and told us to stand by. That day dragged on like a bad dream. The locals refused to return, even when offered protection and supplies. From the hills, we could see smoke from distant villages, signs of life continuing far away from us, as if we had become a point of contamination they didn't want to approach. Around midday, a reconnaissance drone was launched to scan the surrounding forest and ridgelines. It returned clean. No heat signatures. No movement. The official explanation sent back to us was environmental interference. None of us bought it. You don't lose a trained soldier to interference. That evening, Miller gathered us together and addressed the squad. He didn't mention Shadow Walker by name. Instead, he reminded us of discipline, spacing, and the importance of sticking together. No solo movements. No gaps in security. No complacency. Still, I could see it in everyone's eyes. We were shaken. Combat fear is loud and sharp, but this was different. This was a slow, creeping unease, the feeling that we were being studied by something that had already figured us out. Night fell again, and with it came the same unnatural silence. The forest didn't settle, it shut down. Our perimeter lights cast long shadows between the trees, and every one of them looked like it could step forward and become something else. At approximately 2,140 hours, sensors on the eastern side of our perimeter triggered simultaneously, not one by one like an animal passing through, but all at once, as if something had crossed the boundary in a single movement. We snapped to positions, weapons trained outward. Thermal optics showed nothing. Night vision showed shadows bending where they shouldn't. Then we heard it again, that controlled breathing, closer now, right at the edge of visibility. One of the guys whispered that he felt pressure in his chest, like standing too close to heavy machinery. Miller ordered a flare. When it burst overhead, the forest lit up, and for a moment everything froze. The trees, the shadows, and something else, standing just beyond the wire. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen, but too thin, its shoulders sloped, its arms hanging low, almost dragging. Its head was tilted slightly, as if studying us. No facial features were visible, just a darker shape within the darkness. The flare burned out, and it vanished without a sound. We didn't fire. Not because we froze, but because there was no clear target. You can't engage what you can't lock onto. Miller reported the sighting immediately. The response from command was delayed and vague, instructing us to maintain defensive posture and await further orders. That was the moment something changed inside us. We realized we were on our own. Whatever intelligence knew, or didn't know, they weren't prepared to deal with it. Around midnight, one of our perimeter cameras went offline. Then another. No alarms. No warnings. Just silence where there should have been data. Miller ordered a limited sweep, 2 fire teams moving no more than 20 meters beyond the wire. I was on the second team. Every step into the forest felt wrong, like we were stepping into someone else's territory. The ground was soft, but our boots made almost no sound, as if the earth itself was absorbing it. About 10 meters in, we found something that made my stomach drop. Lewis's helmet, placed upright on a rock, clean, undamaged, and facing directly toward our outpost. No blood. No scratches. Just a message, deliberate and precise. We pulled back immediately. The rest of the night passed without direct contact, but none of us slept. Just before dawn, we heard movement on the ridge above us, slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth like a sentry. When the light finally came, the ridge was empty. Command arrived again by helicopter that morning, this time with orders to prepare for extraction within 48 hours. No explanation. No attempt to recover Lewis. He was listed as MIA pending investigation. That designation felt like a lie. You don't investigate something you don't understand, you bury it. As we packed up, I noticed deep impressions near the ridge line overlooking our outpost, identical to the tracks from the first day, but more numerous now, circling the position. Whatever the Shadow Walker was, it hadn't just attacked us. It had been measuring us, testing our reactions, and deciding how far it could go. And judging by the way it left Lewis's helmet for us to find, it wanted us to know one thing very clearly: we were being hunted. By the third night, the idea of extraction felt more like a rumor than a plan. 48 hours can be a lifetime when you know something is circling you, waiting. Command had instructed us to consolidate equipment, destroy anything we couldn't carry, and maintain full defensive posture until air assets returned. No reinforcements. No QRF. Just us, our weapons, and a shrinking perimeter in a forest that no longer felt neutral. The locals never came back. From our elevated position we could see the valley below, empty roads, abandoned fields, smoke rising only from distant hills. It was as if the entire region had collectively agreed to leave us alone with whatever lived in those woods. Miller rotated security every 2 hours instead of 4, trying to keep fatigue from turning into mistakes. We checked each other constantly, hands, eyes, breathing, small signs to make sure no one was breaking under the pressure. Because that was another thing we hadn't reported up the chain, the way the presence affected us mentally. It wasn't fear alone. It was disorientation. Time felt stretched at night, compressed during the day. Sounds seemed delayed. Even our thoughts felt slower, like something was interfering just enough to make us doubt our own senses. Shortly after sunset, our long-range radio picked up a transmission that wasn't meant for us. It was faint, broken, and repeating on a loop. At first, it sounded like static, but then words began to emerge. Coordinates. A call sign we didn't recognize. And a voice, American, strained, whispering as if afraid to be heard. The transmission cut in and out, but one phrase came through clearly every time. It walks between shadows. We tried to respond, cycling frequencies, boosting power, but got nothing back. Intelligence later claimed there were no friendly units operating within 100 miles of our location. That meant one of two things. Either the transmission was old, replayed somehow, or someone else had encountered the same thing we had and never made it out. Miller ordered us to log the frequency and maintain listening watch. None of us said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. This thing didn't just hunt bodies. It hunted information. Around 2,200 hours, movement sensors triggered again, this time on the southern side, then the west, then the north in a slow, deliberate sequence, like someone walking the perimeter and checking each angle. We tracked it as best we could, calling out sectors, adjusting fields of fire, but it never crossed into a position we could fully observe. It stayed just beyond certainty. Then, without warning, Specialist Carter collapsed. No scream. No visible wound. He just dropped, clutching his head, gasping like he couldn't breathe. We dragged him behind cover, checking for injuries, checking vitals. His pulse was erratic, his eyes unfocused. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. "It's standing right behind you." Thermal showed nothing. Night vision showed nothing. Still, every hair on my arm stood up. We pulled Carter back into the center of the perimeter and administered what little medical aid we could. He stabilized after a few minutes, but couldn't explain what happened. He said he felt a presence lean close, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel its breath, cold and dry, like air pulled from a cave. He hadn't seen it. He'd just known it was there. That was when Miller made a decision none of us expected. He ordered all perimeter lights shut off. No illumination. No flares unless absolutely necessary. If this thing used light and shadow to move, we weren't going to make it easier. We switched entirely to passive observation, trusting our optics and each other. The darkness closed in immediately, thick and oppressive. The breathing returned, closer than before, circling, overlapping itself, as if more than one set of lungs was working in perfect coordination. Then we heard footsteps inside the perimeter. Slow, heavy, intentional. We spun, weapons up, fingers tight on triggers, but there was nothing there. One of the guys swore he saw a silhouette move between two men standing less than 3 feet apart, slipping through that narrow gap without disturbing either of them. I believe him, because seconds later, Corporal Hayes screamed. Not a shout, pure panic. We turned to see him lifted off the ground, his rifle clattering down, his body arched as if something had grabbed him from behind. He was pulled upward, not backward, rising into the darkness above us, disappearing between the trees without breaking a single branch. We fired instinctively, controlled chaos erupting as muzzle flashes lit up the night. The rounds hit trees, dirt, nothing alive. The screaming cut off abruptly. Silence followed. We regrouped, shaken, weapons smoking, ears ringing. 2 men gone now. No blood. No evidence. Just absence. Miller called for immediate emergency extraction, breaking protocol, overriding command channels. This time, the response was immediate, but not comforting. We were told air assets were grounded due to unidentified atmospheric conditions. No timeline. No backup plan. Hold position. That order felt like a death sentence. As dawn approached, we noticed something new. Carved into the dirt just beyond our perimeter, using deep gouges that looked like they'd been made by fingers or tools we couldn't identify, was a symbol. Not a word. Not a language. A pattern of intersecting lines and curves that made my head ache when I stared at it too long. The locals had warned us. The Shadow Walker didn't just kill. It marked. And whatever that symbol meant, it wasn't for them. It was for us. By the 4th day, we were no longer operating like a standard U.S. Army infantry squad. We were surviving like men cut off behind enemy lines, except the enemy didn't follow human rules. With 2 soldiers missing and 1 barely functional after whatever had touched his mind, Command finally acknowledged the situation had escalated beyond unknown hostile activity. They didn't call it the Shadow Walker, and they never would, but the tone of their transmissions changed. Voices were tighter. Instructions were shorter. Questions stopped. Instead of asking what we were seeing, they started asking how often it appeared, how close it got, and whether it responded to light, sound, or aggression. That alone told us something important. We weren't the first unit to report this. Miller gathered us after sunrise and laid it out plainly. Extraction was delayed indefinitely. We were to reduce our footprint, minimize movement, and prepare to hold until further notice. No patrols. No sweeps. Just survive. That was the first time I had ever heard a mission framed like that without irony. The forest changed during the day. It didn't look different, but it felt occupied. Shadows lingered longer than they should have. Our depth perception felt off, like distances stretched or collapsed depending on where you looked. Carter, the one who'd collapsed the night before, couldn't stop rubbing his arms, saying the air felt wrong, like static before a storm. Our medic checked him again. No fever, no injury, no explanation. We rotated guard in pairs now, never alone, backs close enough that you could feel the other man breathing. Even then, the sense of being watched never faded. Around midday, one of our motion sensors activated briefly, and then shut itself off. When we checked it, the battery had been removed and placed neatly beside it. No fingerprints. No disturbance to the surrounding ground. That wasn't instinctive behavior. That was intelligence. As dusk approached, the radio crackled again. Same frequency as before. Same looping transmission. But this time it changed. The voice was clearer, closer, and unmistakably terrified. If you can hear this, it said, don't follow the tracks. Don't answer it. And whatever you do, don't let it separate you. Then the transmission cut off. No coordinates. No call sign. Just a warning sent too late. Miller tried to raise command again, pushing hard, demanding answers. What came back chilled me more than the breathing ever had. Maintain position, they said. Observation priority remains in effect. Observation. Not engagement. Not recovery. We weren't there to win. We were there to be watched, to provide data, whether we survived or not. Night fell fast, like someone had flipped a switch. We shut down all unnecessary electronics, relying only on passive optics and whispered communication. The breathing returned almost immediately, closer than ever, circling us in overlapping patterns. It wasn't one thing anymore, or maybe it never had been. The sounds moved independently, syncing and separating like trained operators coordinating an assault. Then came the voices. At first, they were faint, almost lost beneath the wind, but there was no wind. They sounded like us, like Lewis, like Hayes, calling names, asking for help, saying they were hurt and alone. Miller ordered us not to respond, not even to acknowledge it. The training kicked in then, hard and automatic, but it didn't make it easier. Hearing a dead man say your name does something to you that no firefight ever could. One of the newer guys started to step forward, swearing he saw Hayes between the trees. I grabbed him by the vest and dragged him back, hard, knocking him to the ground. He fought me for a second, then broke down shaking, apologizing, saying he just wanted it to stop. That was when it showed itself again. No flares this time. No sudden movement. It simply stepped forward into the thin band of moonlight at the edge of our perimeter, as if it wanted to be seen. Tall. Too tall. Its body looked almost unfinished, like a rough outline filled with darkness instead of flesh. Its limbs bent the wrong way when it moved, joints sliding instead of rotating. Where its face should have been, there was depth, like a hollow space that swallowed the light around it. It didn't rush us. It didn't attack. It just stood there, head tilted, studying us with a patience that felt ancient. Carter screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching his helmet, sobbing that it was inside his head. The rest of us raised weapons, laser dots overlapping on the thing's chest, or where a chest should have been. Miller gave the order to fire. The rounds passed through it. No impact. No resistance. The muzzle flashes illuminated it again and again, each time revealing a slightly different shape, like it was adjusting to our perception. Then it moved. Not fast. Not slow. Just suddenly somewhere else, inside the perimeter, between two positions that should have been impossible to reach without crossing open ground. One of our guys was lifted and slammed into the dirt hard enough to knock the air out of him. Another was thrown backward, like a rag doll. We fired again, screaming now, discipline breaking as fear took over. The thing didn't retaliate the way an enemy would. It didn't need to. It wanted chaos. And it got it. Then just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The breathing faded. The shadows settled back into their places. The forest came alive again with insects and distant animal calls, as if nothing had happened. We were left in a cratered perimeter, gear scattered, men injured, and minds shattered. No one was taken that night. That was almost worse. As dawn broke, command finally sent new orders. Immediate extraction at first light. No explanation. No debrief on site. As the helicopters approached, I looked back at the tree line and saw the tracks again, deep and deliberate, circling us one last time. The Shadow Walker hadn't failed. It had finished whatever it needed from us. Extraction came with the sound of rotors cutting through the morning air, a noise that should have felt like relief but didn't. Relief implies safety, and none of us believed we were safe, not yet. The helicopters hovered just long enough to load us up, crews avoiding eye contact, faces set in tight, professional masks. No questions. No comments about the damage to our gear or the injuries that didn't make sense. We lifted off fast, banking hard over the treeline, and for a moment I thought I saw movement below us, something tall slipping back into the shadows, as if retreating only because it chose to. As the forest disappeared beneath the clouds, an unspoken thought settled among us. We weren't leaving because we won. We were being dismissed. At the forward operating base, everything felt wrong. The place was too clean, too controlled, like a hospital ward waiting for patients who weren't supposed to talk. We were separated immediately, escorted one by one into debrief rooms by officers without unit patches. The questions weren't about tactics or mistakes, they were about sensations. What did it sound like? Did it react to emotion? Did it imitate voices perfectly or imperfectly? Did it show curiosity, aggression, or restraint? When I mentioned the symbol carved into the ground, the man across from me stopped writing and looked up slowly, then asked me to describe it again, carefully, line by line. I did. He nodded once and moved on, as if confirming something he already knew. Lewis and Hayes were officially listed as missing in action, but the paperwork carried a different weight this time, heavy with classification stamps and restricted access notices. No recovery operation was planned. No investigation announced. It was like they had never existed beyond a line item in a report. Medical evaluations followed, but they weren't standard. Doctors monitored brain activity, stress responses, sleep cycles. Carter was sedated after he began screaming during an MRI, thrashing against restraints, shouting that it was standing behind the glass watching him. He was transferred out that same night, destination undisclosed. The rest of us were ordered not to speak to anyone outside our unit about the deployment. Not family, not other soldiers, not even each other without authorization. We signed non-disclosure agreements so thick they felt heavier than our rucksacks ever had. Miller protested, quietly but firmly, and was removed from command within hours. Official reason: temporary reassignment. Unofficially, he knew too much, and worse, he refused to pretend otherwise. Days passed. Then weeks. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. When it did, it wasn't rest, it was observation. I dreamed of standing in that forest again, unable to move, while something paced just out of sight, breathing slow and patient. Others reported the same dreams, the same sensation of being watched even inside locked rooms under bright lights. One night, Torres woke up screaming, swearing he saw a shadow stretch across the ceiling, and pulled back into the corner of the room when he turned the light on. The incident was logged as acute stress response. Counseling was offered. Medication too. None of it touched the core of the problem. You can't medicate the certainty that something knows you now. About a month after extraction, I was called in for what I was told would be my final debrief. The room was different this time, larger, colder. A screen on the wall displayed satellite images of multiple locations, all remote, all heavily forested. Each one had a red marker. The officer conducting the session pointed to them one by one and asked the same question. Does this terrain feel familiar? In more than half of them, it did. Different continents, different countries, same pattern of disappearances, same local legends, different names. Night Walker, Thin Man Forest Watcher, Shadow Walker. He didn't say what they were studying. He didn't have to. He ended the session with a warning disguised as advice. If you ever encounter unexplained phenomena in the field again, report it immediately and disengage. Do not pursue. Do not investigate. And do not attempt to understand it. That last part stayed with me. I was eventually reassigned stateside, my service record clean on the surface, scarred underneath. Sometimes late at night, I'd get the sense that something was wrong with the room. Not visibly, just spatially. Corners seemed deeper than they should be. Hallways felt longer. Shadows lingered even when the light source moved. I stopped sleeping with the lights off. Then one night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No text. Just an image. It showed a helmet, upright on a rock, clean and undamaged, photographed from a low angle. Lewis's helmet. I deleted the image immediately, heart hammering, telling myself it was a cruel joke, a glitch, anything. But the next morning, outside my apartment door, I found a mark scratched into the concrete. Intersecting lines. Curved patterns. The same symbol from the forest. I reported it. Of course I did. The response came within minutes. Men arrived who didn't introduce themselves, photographed the symbol, scrubbed it away, and told me to take leave, no questions asked. Before they left, one of them paused at the door and said something I still hear clearly. It doesn't follow orders. It follows attention. That was when I understood the truth. The Shadow Walker didn't belong to that forest, or that country, or that war. It appeared where it was noticed, where it was feared, where it was watched. And once it learned you could see it, it never really let you go. I'm writing this now because silence has stopped working. For years, I followed their rules. Don't talk, don't document, don't give it shape with words. But the truth is, the Shadow Walker doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It adapts. It waits. It learns the rhythm of your life the way it learned our patrol patterns in that forest. After the symbol appeared on my window, things escalated slowly, deliberately, as if it wanted me functional long enough to understand what was happening. Objects in my apartment began shifting position overnight by inches, never enough to prove movement, always enough to raise doubt. The breathing returned, not loud, not threatening, just present, matching my pace when I walked from room to room. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom and moved to the living room couch, then eventually stopped sleeping at all. Fatigue stripped away denial. I began to see the pattern clearly, the same one that had played out in the mountains. First observation, then isolation, then pressure, and finally a choice. The choice, I realized, wasn't about survival. It was about continuation. The Shadow Walker didn't kill everyone it encountered. It selected. Lewis and Hayes were taken because they reacted. Fear, movement, separation. Carter was spared but broken, his mind opened too wide, too fast. And me? I had been allowed to leave, allowed to live, allowed to remember. That wasn't mercy. That was utility. I went back through the files the analyst had sent me, reading between the lines this time. Every long-term case, the ones who weren't listed as deceased or missing, shared one trait: documentation. Journals, audio logs, unsent letters, people who tried to warn others, people who couldn't carry the knowledge alone. The Shadow Walker didn't just respond to attention. It propagated through transmission. Stories weren't a byproduct. They were the vector. That's when I understood what the symbol really was. It wasn't a mark of territory or ownership. It was a signature, a way of anchoring itself to a place, a mind, a moment. Geometry simple enough to be remembered, complex enough to resist interpretation. A cognitive hook. Once you recognized it, you were connected. The locals knew this. That's why they whispered. That's why they left before nightfall. They didn't fight it because fighting acknowledged it. They endured by limiting its reach. We did the opposite. We scanned, recorded, analyzed. We lit it up with flares and sensors and weapons and fear. We gave it exactly what it needed. 2 nights ago, I received one final message. No number. No image. Just text. You're early. That was all. No threat. No explanation. I didn't reply. I packed a bag instead. If location mattered, I would change mine. If attention fed it, I would withdraw mine. I drove through the night, heading nowhere specific, just away from patterns, away from routines. At sunrise, I stopped at a rest area overlooking a stretch of forest not unlike the one we'd left behind years ago. As I stood there, exhausted, I felt it again, not close, not distant, but aligned like 2 things occupying parallel spaces. I realized then that running wasn't the opposite of engagement. It was still movement, still reaction. So this is my final report, written not for command or analysts or classification boards, but for whoever finds this when I'm gone, or when this spreads further than it already has. The Shadow Walker is not a creature in the way we understand creatures. It has no origin you can bomb, no body you can recover. It exists where awareness sharpens into fear and fear sharpens into focus. It walks between shadows because shadows are where definition breaks down, where the mind fills gaps on its own. You don't defeat it by seeing it clearly. You defeat it by refusing to look for it at all. If you ever hear stories like ours, about something tall, silent, watching, don't chase the details. Don't demand proof. Don't share images or symbols or names. Let the story collapse under its own weight. Boredom is stronger than bullets. Doubt is stronger than fire. The army knows this now. That's why this never made the news. That's why files vanish and men disappear from records instead of from forests. Not to hide the truth, but to starve it. As for me, I don't know what comes next. Maybe it's already too late. Maybe writing this is the last mistake I'll ever make. But if the Shadow Walker responds to attention, then this is my final act of control. I'm ending the transmission here. No more symbols. No more descriptions. No more watching the dark and daring it to move. If you're reading this and nothing has happened yet, that means it hasn't noticed you. Keep it that way. Walk in the light. Trust the ordinary explanations. And whatever you do, if the forest ever goes silent around you, don't stay to listen.